All right. Today we want to explore ideas, conceptions, Latino representation in the media. And it so happens that just this morning, Romero told me about this reboot of West Side Story, which includes a 17-year-old Colombian woman who will play Maria, which is awesome,
You
right?
didn't,
Yay.
yeah, you didn't, it was all over, at least it was all over NPR News.
I'm surprised I didn't catch it,
Yeah.
but sometimes it depends on where I am on my commute. I may not listen to the story. And for me, as a Colombian American, I'm always proud of when I learn Colombians are helping break down walls in Hollywood and elsewhere, like Sofia Vergara, A Modern Family, etc. But I think what this story brings to me is the interesting, um, Latinos as a people are very diverse, and we have so much in common. At the same time, there we do have particular experiences that define our perspective and who we are. So there's definitely differences between Puerto Ricans and Colombians. And for me, it's interesting. I will be interesting to see how the Puerto Rican community will react about the fact that you have a Colombian playing a Puerto Rican.
Yeah, well, that's one of the reasons why I brought this up this morning is because I wanted to get your take on how you felt about that. Obviously, being Colombian, it's going to be different than how a Puerto Rican might feel. I thought that'd be interesting. I can tell you from maybe from a not so ignorant perspective, but I do admit that being Mexican, my knowledge of Puerto Rican culture slash Colombian culture is somewhat limited. And someone like me, my first thought was, well, given the original film, how most of the actors were actually white, using what you called earlier brown face.
Brown face, yeah.
You can tell from some of the pictures from the movie. If we pull them up, let's see, West Side Story.
Some really bad tans, some fake tans that you see there.
um, Puerto Rican actors, right?
Yes.
Because let's see. So here we go, right? So was it this one? Was the other one Puerto Rican actor? Yeah. So like some of these, I can't find the one that we pulled up earlier, but it was definitely you could see some tanning going on. This one's not as bad, but there was another one that was pretty obvious. So anyhow, when I when I heard about it, and in the show they also brought up this point, but when I heard about it, I thought, well, considering that the original film had mainly white actors portraying Puerto Ricans, maybe because Spielberg is trying in this case, he's really trying to be sensitive about, especially with the recent backlash of Hollywood about whitewashing some movies. I
Hmm.
thought, hey, they're trying. It's not Puerto Rican, it's Colombian, but again, from my naive perspective, I thought there's a lot of similarities between Puerto Ricans and Colombians. Maybe it won't. Maybe it's okay. Maybe it's not so bad if you were to ask Puerto Ricans, but I don't really know. What What's your sense of that?
Well, it is. I mean, I think it can be, right? So I think, and again, I'm just learning more about this young lady. So if this young lady is, I believe she was from New Jersey, so she's from the tri-state area, New Jersey, New York area. So there's a shared experience
Mm-hmm.
that even though she is Colombian, she probably can relate to the Puerto Rican experience because for a lot of immigrants in the East Coast, is the Puerto Ricans who first got to the East Coast and who are developed the immigrant experience, right? They were among the first. Them and the Cubans were among the first to come to the United States and sort of create a community. So in some ways, Puerto Ricans are the Mexicans of the East Coast, right? And then you add other groups like the Dominican experience, and then it's just kind of it all becomes an urban um, mesh of everybody trying to assimilate to the dominating culture, but in the process being able to pick up other elements like getting into salsa, reggaeton, bachata, merengue, all these things. So there's this whole your identity as a Latino in the East Coast is a little bit more complex because you also, in some ways, have to. Obviously, you are very Puerto Rican, very Colombian, very Dominican with your people, but then when you interacted with each other, there's a learning that you have to do about what the other groups say and some certain slangs that certain words that may mean one thing for Colombians, a completely different thing for Puerto Ricans. But in
Right.
any case, for me, it kind of takes me back to a couple of episodes when this has happened. So the first one, I think Selena, right? When Jennifer Lopez played Selena, and I think at the time it was a little bit of controversy because even though Jennifer Lopez was an upcoming actress, she wasn't that well known and she wasn't a singer per se, right? She was more of an actress, more of a dancer doing all those things. And I also felt at the time they did this whole brouhaha about finding the best Selena lookalike, and then they went with somebody who was pretty much a known quantity. That said, and I can't remember the name of the film. I think Jennifer Lopez also played a Mexican in this really important film, and I cannot.
Is
I
that
think Mi
is that a
Familia. Didn't she
recent?
play the mom in Mi Familia?
I
One
don't.
of those movies she was in, because I remember there was an image of her crossing the river with a baby, and it was this whole thing.
Oh,
I
you mean the opening scene?
Yeah, so I think but in any way, so there's all
Oh,
that to
we can
say that
find
there
out.
appears that there was yeah, there she is.
Oh, you're right, man. It's been a long time since I saw this film. Yeah.
Yeah, so there's that, right? So obviously externally she can be Mexican, and also we're talking about acting, right? So this is where people can transform themselves and do that. So there's that example, and then the most recent one for me, uh, which I know I'm definitely sensitive about, is the you had a Brazilian playing Pablo Escobar,
Yeah, I know
right?
that, and I know that that's one that I did ask you about because I did see that show recently, and I thought he did a great job as an actor. He seems like he's an amazing actor. Well, he is because after seeing him,
Yeah,
um,
and I think that's it. Like he is. I mean, and not in both Jennifer Lopez, this guy, and this young lady, I'm sure they're great actors or can be great actors, but I guess particularly with the Narcos episode, I think what troubled me is that um, so it's a double-edged sword, right? So what bothered me was that there's so many talented Colombian actors who can play the part and who can do it in a genuine way, who can have a genuine Colombian accent and who can kind of give that authenticity to the role. At the same time, this guy was able to do some of that, right? So he was able to introduce some of the language, some of the lingo, some of the history, and in some ways, because of Narcos, people are now interested in Colombia and that history. And I know that folks who go visit Medellin, for instance, now they try to go to the places that are featured in the movie, and that's problematic within Colombian culture too, because in some ways it idolizes Pablo Escobar, and it does not acknowledge the suffering that he and others associated with him caused.
right.
But anyways, there's something about the the representation you seeing yourself on film, and I think in this case we're happy because we're seeing ourselves as Latinos in film, but then there's an additional layer of it would have been great to have a Puerto Rican play a Puerto Rican in West Side Story. It would be great to have a Colombian play a um, a Colombian in Narcos, etc. But understanding that that's because the way that things are right now, that's not possible, and maybe in the future that can be a reality.
Yeah, I think you touched on a lot of points there. I'm not.
Let's
I,
break it down.
yeah, well, just briefly, if you, based on what you were commenting about Pablo Escobar and being played by a Brazilian, have you seen the Mexican novelas recently? Because most of those guys that are pretending to be narcos using the Mexican slang like "oh no chingues, way," or "no mames, way," or "vente cabrón," like they're not Mexican, and it's
Yeah,
so
some of them are
obvious.
Colombians. Yeah,
They're Colombian, they're Chilenos, they are Argentinos, they are, I don't know if they're Brazilian, but they're from all over the place. And I don't think it bothers me. It doesn't bother me that they're from other countries, honestly. This is just my personal opinion. It is a little bit annoying. I don't see these novelas, but every now and then, like I come across some of them or some YouTube video or clip or um, recently. So our babysitter now, she watches these novelas, but when I get home and she's still here, she's watching these things, and so I like I see them for a few minutes, and that's enough to get a sense. So what bothers me the most, well, not the most, it does bother me a bit that they get the slang incorrectly. When I hear a slang word and the accent is not right, it gives it away right away for me. But that's
yeah,
okay. I think that's understandable. Some actors are better at accents than others. What really bothers me is that they're picking actors from these other countries that are like Euro that have European features. If they were choosing Colombian, Chileno actors from South America that also looked indigenous, then I think that would be great, right? Find the good talent, and as long as you can kind of keep true to it, and because Mexico is a mestizo country, but they're bringing all these guys that are more European looking, and I think that that's still because of Mexico's like how the Mexican mind, especially of the wealthy and the ones that are producing these novelas, has been colonized, and they still think that it's better to have European features on TV. But I think that's a different topic for a different time. I don't want to get too much into that. I just that when you were talking
but it's
about,
related though, right?
well, I think
What that happens in Mexico and other
but
parts of
that's
Latin America.
no, that's true, but that's not as is not really the same thing as what's happening in the United States. Because I think if anything in the United States, surprisingly, it's a little bit more forward thinking in that sense. Because if you looked at the movie, what was the movie about Dia de los Muertos, the Coco movie,
Uh-huh.
all of the characters were dark skinned, right? And the kid was indigenous looking, and it created a good mesh of what actually the Mexican community looks like. That it's a spectrum, that you have dark skin and then you have some lighter skins on the like in the family, but for the most part, and you're gonna find that there's a lot of indigenous features, and they did a really good job at that. Had that movie been done in Mexico, it wouldn't have been done like that. And so I think here in this case with a West Side Story and Rachel Zegler, the Colombian actress. I think Steven Spielberg's actually trying to do a push to get Latino actors, and they're not going for this Eurocentric. They're just trying to find like what's gonna be authentic, someone that's gonna represent Latinos authentically, and they're not as concerned about the tone or the physical appearance. And they found this girl that there's this video that we watched earlier, right? Where is she? Is this her? No, this is
Yeah, that's fair.
yeah, but where's the video where she's singing? Oh, is this it?
Okay.
So you can hear her. So she has an amazing voice. She's obviously got the talent, and I think that's great that's happening. I think for me personally, like I said, maybe they were hoping to find a Puerto Rican, but maybe they saw her and they realized like, well, we have to cast someone that's very talented as well. Do you think maybe this is a part where like it would be good to have the input of a Puerto Rican? Maybe are there like which Puerto Rican actress do you think um, would play this role and be like good at it?
Hmm. Yeah, there may also be because Puerto Rico is one of those places that even though there are what about 4 million people who now live in the island, there's just full of talent, and they just and I'm sure that if Steven Spielberg did a auditions in Puerto Rico, I'm sure they would have found the another young Puerto Rican with similar traits.
and
Maybe not,
also
but I think their chances are that there probably would have been someone who to fit the role. Obviously, it would have taken a lot of more effort and a lot of more time to go through that process.
well, a lot of the times, what the excuse that they'll use is that they want someone with name recognition, or they want someone with appeal, someone that they think is going to bring
Somebody who's
people.
qualified, right?
Yeah, but in this case, Rachel Zegler, she's an unknown, isn't she? Like, she's
That's what I'm
not
saying.
a superstar in novelas, or she's not a major superstar already in American television. So I think you're correct in that. I think if they wanted to, if they said, you know what, we're gonna get a Puerto Rican, they could have just done a casting call. Or how many they got? 30,000. So I'm sure that they got a lot of Puerto Ricans. So they could have found the talent. Maybe not like a known someone that's already has a high profile in Puerto Rico, but it doesn't seem like that's what they were interested in to begin with. So I think you're correct that they could have easily just found the talent. Uh,
Yeah, and it's interesting that this movie is being done by Steven Spielberg, right? Because I don't know the peculiars for it. Obviously, I know West Side Story is um such an amazing story, right? It's kind of a lot of people know West Side Story and what it means. And Spielberg, he has that obviously another famous director. So it's interesting that in some ways, so in some ways it's great that he's doing the movie and that he seems to be committed to having representation um in the film. At the same time, is a white man telling the West Side Story, right? So it's still a very narrow perspective.
yeah, but I mean, it's gonna take time because we need to get more directors in Hollywood that are Latino background, so that we can start telling our stories also.
Yeah.
And I think that we've talked on this before, that um, you need a lot of people trying to do something in order to get the talent. Because if there's only a handful of Latinos that are trying to be directors, apart from whatever barriers they need to overcome, if it's only a handful, then the talent will only be that good. It's a numbers game, really. The more they try to do it, the better the talent's going to be, the more likely that they'll be able to overcome or break down the barriers to get into Hollywood. So that starts at the ground level with how many of us that are in positions to do something, how many of us are actively like encouraging after school programs in drama that encourage people to go into theater. Right, so it's like that whole process needs to exist, and I'm sure it's probably in place, but it takes time for those changes to take effect. And so maybe that's something that will happen in 10, 20 years, like, again, depending on how strong the commitment is from people like ourselves to encourage and encourage future generations to get into that.
Yeah.
The um the the other point that I wanted to bring up, when you were talking about the similarities between, because you grew up on the East Coast, so you have a good insight into what the relationships were between Colombians and Puerto Ricans, and what that was like, what the dynamics were. But when you were talking about that, about her, being from New Jersey, and she'll share some of the common experiences with the people from those neighborhoods, whether they're Puerto Rican or from other places. And also, you also mentioned the what Colombians and Puerto Ricans share, like the music, reggaeton, and such things. But to what extent are we just talking about Puerto Ricans in the United States? Because I don't have a sense of how Puerto Ricans on the mainline feel, on the main, what do they call it, the
The
on the
main,
island.
well, the island
Yeah, and then they call the Puerto Ricans that live in New York, they call them
and the mainland, yeah.
mainlanders, and the islanders. I forget what the term in Spanish is that they used to use. But because I even within them, right, there are some differences, because the ones on the island see the ones in the U.S. slightly different. So how do you think the ones on the island would feel? Because they're growing up on the island, they don't grow up in these communities where they interact with Colombians on a day-to-day basis, so they don't feel that same connection.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think, yeah, I don't think I'm in a position to respond to that, but I think the fact that Puerto Rico, as it relates to the Latino experience in the East Coast, and as it relates even just to the Colombian experience in general. So, Puerto Rican artists have been popular in Colombia for decades, right? So when you think of El Gran Combo de las Estrellas, when you think of so many of the artists in Fania, like Hector Lavoe and all those things. So like I think culturally, Puerto Rico has exported a lot of that culture and who they are to other parts of Latin America, including Colombia. And I think it's interesting because it's in New York and it's in the United States, where where that experience gets shared. So then for me, it was in Rhode Island that I learned more about the Puerto Rican experience, that I learned more about the accent, that I learned about reggaeton, that you learn a little bit more about the history, the complicated history that Puerto Rico has had with the US. And then in some ways I take that and share that with my circle of friends. And then when I go to Colombia, that is shared. And it's interesting that now with the emergence of J Baldwin, of so many Colombian reggaetoneros, a lot of that has had to do with collaborations with Puerto Rican artists like Nicky Jam, Daddy Yankee, Wisin y Yandel. So there's this mutual mutual cultural exchange and music sharing that's happening between Colombians and Puerto Ricans, because we love salsa too. We put our twist on it, and the thing is like all that to say that I think it's just there's this appreciation, there's this almost this respect between cultures, right? And I think it happens with other cultures in Latin America. Is like, well, you guys have this going on for you, we have this going on for you, and then let's come together and see what we create together, and let's
And
have fun. Because even now you have reggaeton mixed with vallenato,
right,
uh, which
and
is interesting.
and
Um,
sorry, I was going to say that, especially in the in the similarities and all of the cultural sharing and collaboration that you're talking about when it comes to music, that's where I have seen the biggest uh, similarity with like Colombian and Puerto Rico, especially like you mentioned, all of the reggaeton artists that are coming out of Colombia. So I have seen that. I think from someone who is from a Mexican background, I do see a stronger connection between like Colombia and Puerto Rico than I would see between like Mexico and Puerto Rico. I actually see more of a closer relationship between Mexicans and Colombians because Mexico they adopted pretty much like the cumbia as somewhat of like their national type of music too, and Mexicans love vallenato. You go to Mexico, you still hear way more of that than you would of say reggaeton. You don't see Mexicans in Mexico starting reggaeton bands the same way that you would in Colombia or maybe even in Honduras. When I was in Honduras, they're like huge into it, and so I think that that does have to do a little bit with the similarities that the cultures share. And um, going back to what you mentioned about when they casted Jennifer Lopez as Selena, I don't really remember how I felt. I think some of us at a certain point were just happy that we were seeing Latinos actually portray Latino roles. So we weren't thinking too much about that. I did want to ask you, how would you have felt if the role of Pablo Escobar would have been played by a Puerto Rican? Would you have gotten the same reaction as you got that it was played by a Brazilian?
Yes, and it goes back to the point that you were making earlier with respect that right away you will be able to tell the difference between a Colombian and a Puerto Rican accent, or somebody speaking with a Puerto Rican accent trying to speak Colombian.
But what if he was great at imitating accents?
Well, yeah, that's the thing. I mean, if you're great at imitating accents, I think that would would a make it a little less distracting. But I think the fundamental question still stands, right? And I think it's
Well, I think that's what I'm trying to parse. I'm trying to
yeah.
understand. So so it doesn't seem like, so you don't have a problem then with somebody else playing Colombian roles as long as they portray them in an authentic way, or do you still have like a minor issue that it doesn't go to a Colombian?
I still have a minor issue that it doesn't go to a Colombian. And is and I'm trying to understand what that is, because
Right.
like in other respects, right? When when the Puerto Ricans won Olympic gold medals, or when there's this sort of shared, there's something that a Puerto Rican, a Mexican, a Cuban, or somebody else does who's Latino, there's this shared sense of like, oh wow, like this is awesome for all of us. It's awesome for the Puerto Ricans, but it's awesome for Latinos because it shows that we accomplished these things. So there's that. So I'm trying to understand for myself why. I guess part of it is just you just know that there's some nuances that as a Colombian you are able to bring and to bring in that role. You might be able to appreciate, not to say that another actor doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what you're getting at is, a great actor is a great actor is a great actor. So if you have somebody who's great, who throws themselves into that role, and who can actually bring some fresh eyes to something that perhaps to a Colombian is just something that's just normal, right? Like,
Yeah.
I think that's the other thing when as an actor from a different cultural background, you have your own culture and you say, oh, that's interesting. I wonder why this happened, or why they responded this way, or why. So I think I also see the value of having an outside or fresh eyes perspective in that particular situation.
So is it, going back to what you said about the Olympics and how we feel, and then you trying to understand what is it that still doesn't feel right about a non-Colombian playing the Colombian role? Is it that in one sense, when we're happy that Puerto Ricans win a gold medal, that we get a collective pride because we have this collective sense of identity, Latino
Yeah.
Americanos, from some common experience. But then when it comes to something like a Colombian playing a Colombian role, you get more of like a personal pride. It's no
Mm,
longer, you're not really sharing it with the rest of the Latinos. It's yours. It's a stronger sense of pride to have a Colombian playing a Colombian, versus, just like it's a stronger sense of pride to have a Colombian win the gold medal. Like, let's
yeah.
say that it's the Olympics, and I don't know what sport this would be, but in the top three, you have a Puerto Rican, a Colombian, and like maybe an American. And so the Puerto Rican got first place, the Colombian got second. Well, you're still proud of the Puerto Rican, but you think to yourself like, oh man, had the Colombian got in the first place, it would have felt, because that's closer to, that's your identity.
Yeah.
That's what hits home. That's your, it's a stronger connection that you have to your country than you do to other countries. So in a sense, it's about sharing some of that. And when it comes to like, hey, this is a Colombian role, I don't know if I want to share it with other countries. In this case, I want it to be something from my own home. I'm just trying to make sense of it. This is me
Yeah.
trying to like
Yeah.
rationalize. This is probably how I would feel too. Let me comment. Let me comment
Well,
on this.
can I,
On Go ahead.
before we move on, I think there was something that you brought up that I wanna that's relevant. Um, I think similar to what's happening now in Mexico, where there's this a lot of novelas about narcos and things like that. What what the movie, the original series Pablo Escobar, El Patrón del Mal, that was done, there was a collaboration actually between Telemundo and RCN, which was one of the large Colombian producers, is that in some ways, as painful as it is, and unfortunately in Colombia, we're still processing everything that happened during those times, and
Mm-hmm.
also just the ongoing culture that it has, right? So I feel in some ways when the Colombian series came about, it was almost a process for people who lived that time to have some sort of catharsis, right? To process, to say, oh wow, I forgot how this felt, or I remember how this felt, and I didn't have this information. I I now I see it differently, and also it provides an opportunity for the younger generations to understand what happened and how people were. So there's this sense of like, as it's your own history, you're processing your own traumas, and then when Netflix came up and sort of used that story as its basis for a show, it kind of removed, it removed that, and now it just became, oh, this is another story about uh, narcos in Colombia, and obviously for Colombians having sensitivity, that's how most people, if not all people, see us. That's the first assumption when they think of Colombians, is that the negative coca, all these things,
Mm-hmm.
which it bothers folks. But I think that's another element that when that if the person is from a different ethnic group, they just are not, they're processing it differently, or I guess it just kind of makes makes the exercise a bit different from like, this is our history, this is our process, this is how we need to grow, versus, oh, we're gonna tell their story, we're gonna um share this entertainment, this thing, but it's going to be more about entertaining and and talking about this culture versus processing it.
Yeah, and as you were talking, it reminded me of the all of the movies that they made about the Cuban Revolution, and
Hmm.
then the actors that they get to play Che Guevara. So you have the Motorcycle Diaries back in the early 2000s with Gael Garcia Bernal, Mexican actor. And you
Hmm.
have the recent one in, I think, didn't we see it in the theater together? The one with Benicio del Toro?
Oh
I
yeah.
think we saw it in GC. Yeah, so Benicio del Toro again. So I wonder, I wonder if that was also how the Argentinos felt, or how they feel when they see non-Argentinos playing, especially because they have a ton of talent in Argentina, a ton of actors that could have played those roles. Let me. I was showing this picture for a while, and I wanted to comment on it briefly. So this is Latinx now. So these guys are saying we're so excited to see Rachel Zegler play such an iconic role. And I did spend some time on Twitter earlier trying to get a sense of what the reaction would be. I'm not seeing a strong sense of negative reaction around this. So which is good, I would
Yeah.
say. But I did want to go back to the reason why I was asking you about how you would feel if a Puerto Rican played that role of Pablo Escobar, then you would find it understandable then if Puerto Ricans took some minor issue with a Colombian playing this role, even though she's talented, even though she is from New Jersey and there's probably a lot of similarities, if it still at some level bothered them a bit.
Yes.
Um, I guess we should have invited one of our Puerto Rican friends. Do you still stay in touch with what's his name? What was his name? Who were the two guys? They were from the island though.
Yeah, I remember them. We
Uh,
can protect the
yep,
innocent, but
yep.
but
Oh,
yeah,
right. Let's not say their names. Yeah. So
yeah.
okay. Yeah. So we
Well,
had
yeah.
But then we had others that were from Puerto Rico also. I think. Well, we can ask him later, and then we can figure it out. But so far, it seems like it's not such a big deal. I can tell you personally. For me, I think in the cases that it has bothered me, and I was actually looking at this novela because this is a novela that I know of because my younger brother got into it. So El
Yeah.
Señor de los Cielos. So here I am. I I know there's like a ton of novelas, but this is the only one that I know. So I started looking up the cast, and it turns out that at least like the top, from what I saw from the top 10, it looks like they were mainly Mexican. So this guy Rafael Amaya, which is the lead actor, he's Mexican, it seems. So let's see, where is he? Guy Ecker, Rafael. Here it is. Rafael Amaya, Mexican actor from Hermosillo, Mexico. And then this other Carmen Aruba, Mexico City. Um, this guy looks like this guy's
It's
Colombian.
Colombian.
Yeah. And then this guy Carlos, Spanish actor. And then Jesus More, Mexican, but they don't show pictures. Um, this guy Ecker, Brazilian. So I think in this one, it's not fair to say that for the most part it's mainly like South American actors. At least they have a Mexican in the lead role. But a lot of these like spin-offs, because I think this was one of the first novelas, or at least like one of the initial ones that started this whole wave of novelas centered on narcos. But all these other spin-offs now, when the ones that are playing now, when I see them, you see this predominantly European-looking actors, and then you hear the accent, and you're just like, yeah, that guy's not Mexican. And but you can, even within Mexico though, like when they cast, even if Mexicans were to cast an entire Mexican cast, they would all be predominantly of majority European heritage, because that's like a common theme in Mexico and throughout Latin America.
That's
Um,
true.
this is Little Puppet, by the way. Look, he looks like Little Puppet from American Me.
Oh, really?
You know that movie? Have you seen it?
I don't think I have
Yeah,
actually.
there's a scene with Little Puppet. Yeah, well, maybe we can watch it later.
That's funny.
Um,
And I
so
think,
go ahead.
yeah, one thing I was gonna say that I think part of the maybe the fact that been there hasn't been a negative reaction to this story. I want to say that I think it also represents sort of an evolution and a maturity of of our understanding of what it means to be Latino. And I think that in order to be Latino, you have to be, for the most part, I think Latino is such a experience that you live in the United States, right? Because here's when you, and I think you were getting at this earlier, that here there's just a deeper understanding of our roots, of our biases, of how we all come from different places, but how much we have in common, and the little differences that we do have, but how much overall we have in common. So in some ways, I think this represents another step towards that Pan American identity or Latino identity, to say, hey, I'm just happy that we have a Colombian American who's playing this Puerto Rican role, and that Puerto Rico and the experience of Puerto Rican immigrants or Puerto Rican residents of New York at the time is being told a little bit more genuinely, because now there's a Latina who is performing and who sort of brings an authentic image to that experience that before there wasn't. So I think there's this sense of progress, right? Like, okay, this is now being told, and Latino actors are being used, and this is part of our shared experience, that it really doesn't matter if you're Puerto Rican, Colombian, Mexican. What's important is that we are uh, putting our best foot forward, and that people are getting to know us in a deeper way, and also, and it's not just the stereotypical Anglo-Saxon image of who we are. Is we're mixed. We have all of these cultures that come that make who we are as a person, as people.
Yeah, that's true. And you're talking about two things there. One is the negative representation that we've have had to see for a long time, whether it was the actor was being played by a white, the character was being played by a white actor or a Latino actor. If the depiction was still negative based on their narrow understanding of the culture, then that was still overall negative. So that in a sense seems to like be getting better now, where we see more authentic, more dimensions to the characters as opposed to just the Mexicans from East LA being cholos and having to only be siloed into those roles. And so that's getting better. And I think we are starting, hopefully, like you said, I think we are starting to see more authentic representation in terms of like the actors that play these characters now. And in this case, with this Colombian actress, not Puerto Rican, but hey, a lot better than it would have been before. So I think that's what matters, the forward progress. And as you were talking, I was thinking about what it has taken to get here, and I think we have to maybe extend a thanks to all the people from the anime world that have been complaining about all these anime movies being whitewashed, because I think that that is part of the backlash in the recent years that probably has made directors more conscious of this. Because I'm a huge anime fan. I've been watching anime since I was a kid.
Like
So
Japanese anime?
yeah, Japanese anime. Like I love that stuff. And so when they did Ghost in the Shell, when they've done, they did a Dragon Ball movie a few years ago. It was terrible, absolutely, because Hollywood hasn't cracked the formula yet on how to do anime. Um, I mean, story is getting the movie right is one thing, but then they don't get the movie right, so they don't know how to adapt it. But then it's all white, an all white cast, and again, maybe I'm probably more concerned about them just creating a good movie. I don't know if how I feel about the cast being predominantly white, because so here's the thing, right? So here's the counter argument.
Hmm.
When the Chinese make movies, who are their heroes and who are their lead? Obviously, they're Chinese, but obviously, China is not a multicultural society. But when Japan makes movies, are they casting predominantly Japanese roles? Or again, they're doing that, but Japan is not a multicultural society. It's a very uniform state. The United States is a multicultural country, but at the same time, what's the percentage of people in the United States that are of like Japanese descent? This country is still predominantly white, and those that are creating movies are still predominantly white. And
Hmm.
so if they're just casting what's common to them, is they're casting white actors to be in movies that they're producing, it'd be nice if they use Japanese actors because that's what the original anime had. But I don't I don't care as much. I just care that they put on a good movie, even if they're white actors. I didn't really care as much that it was Scarlett Johansson playing Ghost in the Shell. I just wanted to see a good movie, and it wasn't a terrible movie, but I wish that it would have been as big as the original movie was, like the anime movie. And I mean, before I people start thinking that I'm just someone that, uh, or at least like if I before I get criticism about my opinion, it's not that I don't, like I said, it's not that I don't want to see um, Japanese actors in these movies to make them a lot more authentic, but I think my stance is if I'm not seeing it, I usually point the criticism inward as opposed to outward. So if I'm not if Selena was played by Jennifer Lopez, um, when that happened, the criticism was, well, what do I need to do? What do I need to do to change that if I don't like it? Right. So if I don't like what I'm seeing, how am I actively contributing to change that, as opposed to just blaming Hollywood for not doing what I like? And so maybe that's why I don't really, maybe that's why I don't get as upset when I see these things, because I don't see it as outside of my control. There's something that I can do about it. And what am I choosing to do about it? Because I know what it is now, and I can choose to do something so that it changes in the future. And so maybe that's like my outlet to not just get caught up being upset and like saying, hey, well, you need to change this, you need to change this. Yeah, that's part of the process. But beyond just complaining, what else am I doing to change the status quo?
Well, it's interesting because you are personalizing something that for some people may be a daunting challenge, like the diversification of Hollywood and the stories that are not only told but also recognized in Hollywood. And I think this is an appropriate conversation as we are in the middle of the award shows for movies, right?
Hmm.
So when you think of all the very different type of movies that they are, and there's, some recognition of diversity. And actually, as of now, a lot of that diversity is mostly African American, right?
Hmm.
It's African American, a little bit of Asian, a little bit of Latino with Roma. But I think that what I find interesting is that I don't think most people are able to say, okay, this is a larger issue, and this is my little thing, the little thing that I can do in order to change that. So taking the anime example, like what sort of action did you rationalize for yourself as to how you can contribute to maybe Hollywood having a better approach to making those movies or the casting of them?
So I think with anime, it's slightly different than the sense of personal responsibility that I would feel if I was upset that they weren't casting like Mexican actors. I think with anime, the best I can do is join the chorus, right? Even though it may not necessarily like be a big issue to me. If I do want to see Japanese actors, then I should speak up and protest. I should like become a keyboard warrior. Um,
Hmm.
Beyond that, you're right. I don't see myself actively like when it comes to Latinos. Here's if it bothered me to the point where I feel like I need to do something. Here's what I would do: start volunteering my time in schools in kids to help them develop programs, because you develop a program for the arts and theater, and you pass enough students over a 10-year period, you may pass like a few hundred students there, and maybe like 2% of them actually end up making it out and into Hollywood. But that 2% is better than nothing. So I don't think in terms of like I need to bring about change right away. I see the bigger picture, and I do understand that one person can make a difference. It may just take a long time. So that's for Latinos, that's how I see it. But yeah, with anime, it's anime is like a hobby, something that I like, but I don't have a personal attachment to it because anime is from Japan. It's not. I don't have that sense of connection to it. I just love it for good storytelling. So I'm more of like an outside spectator in that case. And to the extent that yeah, they should be casting Japanese actors to play those roles. Yeah, yeah, it'd be nice if they could find great Japanese actors to do it, but it's not like such a big issue to me. It doesn't bothers me as much. It only bothers me in the sense that I want to be consistent. So if I'm asking for that with Latinos, I should be consistent in supporting the people that want authentic Japanese actors. But in terms of what I'm doing to bring about that, I'm not doing as much as I would do to bring about Latinos, because that's a more personal to me.
Hmm. Yeah, but I think fundamentally is about the power of storytelling in any culture. And also, a good story is a good story anywhere. So there's that, and also obviously is those stories that, in essence, can tell a history or can help change minds, right? And it can help show how far we've come or how much we can do individually as a group of of people. So I think that's why stories are such an important part of the human experience. And obviously there's been different formats, and there continue to be different stories, whether theater, movies, songs, things like that. But it's such a powerful vehicle for us to feel that sense of connection and also to just trigger that curiosity and try to learn more about what it is that we're listening to, or the type of experience that it's being presented.
Yeah, I agree. Um, I'm still waiting for the day when Hollywood cracks the formula for telling good anime stories. There's a ton of good anime movies, and I'm hoping that happens, or I'm hoping that the Japanese also crack the formula for telling good, taking good anime from the comic book to movies, because the Japanese have made a lot of these um, comic book stories into movies, but they just don't get it right. They haven't been able to figure out how to do it the same way that, say, something like the Avengers has.
And
And
so are they animated or are they
no, they're real life movies.
real life movies? Okay.
Yeah, yeah. So like Attack on Titan. I don't know if you know about that movie. It's an anime where these like huge monsters invade. They routinely invade what is really left of humanity, which is like segment off, corralled in small cities, and they put up these huge walls. Then these giants keep on coming over and like wrecking havoc and killing them and eating them. And they turn that into a real life movie, and the graphics are amazing. It's all Japanese cast, right? But
Mm.
it's just the directing, the storytelling is just it's terrible. It's not a good movie, and so either the Japanese crack it first or Hollywood. And if Hollywood does it and they're using white actors, I think that'll be a secondary concern to me. I will I will support anyone that says that yeah they should be Japanese actors. I just want a good story at the end of the day. But again, look, my background, I wasn't as upset when they cast Jennifer Lopez as a Mexican. I
Yeah.
said close enough.
Yeah.
If I want to take it to the next level, I got to do something about it, because we need to have, first of all, we need to have way more um, Mexicans that are available for those roles, because right now it's a small percentage. So I try to be a little more pragmatic in terms of like just overreacting. I try to see, okay, well, if there is a problem, how can I be part of the solution to it? Um, yeah. So anyway, any do you think there's anything else here that we should get into, or you ready for some final thoughts on this?
No, I think final thoughts would be appropriate.
So next story about Pablo Escobar, played by a Mexican. How's that gonna make you feel? Okay,
I
what's
love
the
it.
word? Oye
I
pareja,
love it
or
as
oye.
long as it's a great movie.
What if instead of saying, what's the common word that Colombians say? It's not pareja, it's parcero or
Parcero.
en marica.
Nah.
Oye, marica. What if instead of saying that, he just keeps saying, oye, wey, oye, wey?
Then it's not the story of Pablo Escobar.
Oh, that's so funny. Well, if Mexicans decide to do a story on Pablo Escobar, you can be sure that they're gonna put a Chileno in there or some. They won't use a Mexican. They won't. They may use a Colombian, but they'll just grab
Something
whoever
random.
they can. The more European looking, the better.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Those are my final thoughts. What about you?
No, I appreciate the dialogue. I think we covered a lot of ground. And I think that it's interesting to see how representation in the media is getting better, but obviously there's still a lot of road to be traveled, and I think there seems to be a desire to make sure that we continue to move in that direction. So I'm excited to see. I look forward to seeing how this movie comes out. So I guess it'll probably take a 2 to 3 years. So let's make sure that when it comes out, we go see it, and then we'll have a show about our reaction to it.
Sounds good, man. All right. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Yep.